you also, okay, thank you, Alexa, go away. Fine, so he also had a very good sense of humor as well. It was actually quite funny. Anyway, I can't think of any jokes that he said, but he had a good sense of humor. Okay, we're talking about medical ethics, and so first of all, to begin, I should point out there are a number of principles in Jewish law that we follow in terms of medical ethics, which are somewhat different from secular law. In secular law or secular ethics, medical ethics, I would say probably number one is patient autonomy. There are also issues of things like quality of life. Cost is an important factor, etc. So now these are all actually also considered to be important issues in Jewish law. There are many cases where patient autonomy comes into effect, but it's not an absolute. Let me give you one example. For example, a case where patient autonomy is something important would be a patient can choose, let's say, between two procedures. Here's a classic case, which actually did come up. There's two ways of replacing a heart valve. There is an organic replacement. They usually, I think, use a pig valve, a heart valve from a pig, and they have very similar anatomies to humans and biological system, etc. And or the alter, but that would require, if I remember correctly, that would require major surgery and would have to be replaced every now and again. But the person could lead a normal lifestyle without a lot of drugs that they would have to take for that. The alternative was an artificial, like a silicon heart valve, that would last longer, would need less surgeries to replace it, but would also require a lot of medication and massive modification of lifestyle. So how do you decide in something like that? There, Jewish law would say patient decision, patient autonomy, okay? In other words, the patient's choice. Does she want to lead a lifestyle which is severely limited, but less risky surgery? Or would she prefer a lifestyle which is more normal, but every few years, major surgery? That's not an easy call to make. And that's a call that would be made by the patient, not by a physician and not by the rabbi. On the other hand, patient autonomy, we don't go all the way with that because, for example, in Jewish law, in Genesis 9, the Torah tells us, shofech dam ha'adam ba'adam damo yishafech, that there is a prohibition against committing suicide. Suicide is a form of murder. Jewish law does not give the human complete autonomy over their body, over their life. Maimonides, for example, points out that the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, when we had a Jewish court way back in the days of the temple, so a Jewish court would not accept a confession in a capital crime. So if a person said confessed to a capital crime, that would not be accepted. So some commentaries maintain that the reason for that is to prevent torture and abuse and enhanced interrogation by the body of law, etc., which makes a lot of sense, especially when you consider that throughout medieval until 200 years ago, 300 years ago, torture was a standard part of the court system. It was just very normal, right? So if a confession is not accepted, torture is useless. But Maimonides gives a different logic for that. Maimonides says that the reason that a confession is not accepted is because maybe the person is suicidal. Maybe they're depressed and they don't feel they can pull the trigger themselves, but this way they'll confess to the crime. It's out of their hands now. They'll be killed by the court. So not acceptable. And Maimonides gives the reason why. He says, because the verse in Isaiah says that God says, the soul is mine, which is lent to you, but it is ultimately mine. So it's not ours to dispose of as we want. Our body and our soul is not ours to dispose of as we want. So therefore, patient autonomy when it comes to something like suicide, not allowed. There are exceptions. I should point out, when the verse back in Genesis 9 says, damo benafsho, that a person, his soul will be sought, his blood will be sought from his own hand, begins with the word ach, aleph, chaf. I don't know if you know what that means, but it means however or but. It like diminishes the verse. So the Medrash Rabbah says on that verse that it's diminishing the prohibition of suicide, meaning it seems to be allowing certain cases. The Torah does not tell us what case, but the oral tradition tells us a case like Saul, Shaul HaMelech, King Saul. Any of you heard the expression throwing yourself on your sword? May have heard that expression. That comes from the Bible. King Saul was on a mountaintop, Mount Gilboa, surrounded by the enemy, the Philistines. He had been wounded, grievously wounded by archers, and he was with his sons. Both of them were killed, Yehonatan, and he has an armor bearer with him, like a teenager who'd schlepped the stuff for the king into battle. And he tells the armor bearer, he says, kill me. I don't want to be captured by the pagans. I'll be paraded around and they'll make a sport of me, etc. He says, so he didn't actually say that. He just said, kill me. The armor bearer says, no, I'm not going to touch the king. He was, yes, it was the middle of battle, but he was no way. He's not going to do it. So King Saul takes his sword, puts it hilt first into the ground and throws himself on his sword and kills himself. Later on, tragically, the Philistines capture his body and the body of his sons. They take it to Beit Sha'an, which is in the north of Israel, and they hang the bodies on the walls of the city of Beit Sha'an. King David leads a commando mission to recover the bodies, and they recover the bodies, give them a Jewish burial. King David wrote a beautiful eulogy and poem to commemorate that. Eich naflu giborim, how did the heroes fall? Be that as it may, King Saul was a case the Talmud says was permissible suicide. This type of interesting. We'll get to Masada. It's a good question, Rose. So how is that permitted? So the answer that is generally the consensus is that it was permitted because he was committing suicide to prevent a serious desecration of the name of God. Here is a king of the Jewish people who has been anointed by a prophet of the one God, who now will be paraded through the streets as a captive by polytheists, worshippers of Avodah Zarah, idol worship, and that will be a serious Chilul Hashem, desecration of the name of God. Consequently, he would be allowed to do it for that. Now, someone asked about Masada. So the truth is, Masada, which occurred in approximately 73 CE, 3 years after the destruction of the temple, a group of Jews, about approximately 900, were in on this fortress constructed by Herod near the Dead Sea, massive fortress. And the story goes they were surrounded by the Romans. They had walls around the fortress. It was beautifully, amazingly well constructed by Herod the Great, crazy, but a fantastic builder. The Jews up there, the Romans were very methodical. They had lots of slave labor and they had a lot of time. So the Romans just started building a massive ramp which they could march an entire army up the ramp. It still exists. They used Jewish slaves to build it because they realized the people on Masada would be hesitant to throw rocks, boiling oil, and that type of stuff on their fellow Jews. And they were right. So the Romans constructed this huge ramp. They get up to the top. When they finally get into Masada, they find 900 corpses. Josephus Flavius tells this story, and he says the speech of Eleazar, the leader of these Jews, was better to die by our own hand as free men rather than to be slaves at the hands of the Romans. Now, if that's what Eleazar argued, then Jewish law would say that is not correct. Jewish law would say that's not justified suicide. To prevent being slaves, you should not commit suicide. Better, on the contrary, to live as a slave under the Romans than to die at your own hand. So that would be incorrect. If, on the other hand, and conjecture has it, that they committed suicide committed suicide in order to, because they realized that the women and children would almost certainly be raped or taken to brothels in Rome and other places, which unfortunately often happened after Roman invasions, and they would not be able to protect themselves. The men would very likely be tortured, and even though a person can have the courage to commit suicide or to die in a moment, but to withstand torture, virtually impossible. And so therefore that may have been justified. Be that as may, we don't really know what went on up there because they were all dead. So Josephus didn't completely make it up. But we're not sure if that's what happened, which is interesting because since Masada happened in 73 and the Mishnah was written in 170, only 100 years later, it is interesting to note that never is Masada mentioned in the Mishnah. The Talmud, which was written 300 years later or so, never mentions Masada either. So my belief is, it's an educated guess, is that maybe the reason the Talmud doesn't mention it is the Talmud didn't know what went on then. So it couldn't have condemned it because that may be incorrect. It couldn't have praised it because that may also be incorrect. So we don't know. So it doesn't mention it, just apropos of that. Okay. So anyway, what we see is that certain types of suicide may be permitted. So I'm just contrasting in secular law, in secular ethics, where patient autonomy is paramount. Jewish law says, look, patient autonomy is certainly important in certain areas, but it's not absolute, it's not paramount. Secondly, in Jewish tradition, life, even a short lifespan, is considered of infinite value. And that means we must do everything we can to save life. And I'll give you an example. The Talmud says, and life takes precedence over the vast majority of the 613 commandments, over 610 of them, actually. The three that it doesn't take precedence over, we will discuss, but they're murder, incest, adultery, sexual crimes, and idolatry. So, but leaving those aside, let's say, I don't know, the person's got some rare disease and the doctor says that I know it's Yom Kippur and Yom Kippur that falls on Shabbos, but you must roast a fresh pig on a spit, baste it with non-kosher wine and eat it heartily today, otherwise you'll die. Jewish law says eat and enjoy. Actually, it doesn't say enjoy, but it says you can eat it, right? And you can eat it. So that's fine. That takes precedence over Shabbos and Yom Kippur and Kashrut, etc. So here's the scenario. The Talmud says a building collapses. Unfortunately, we have seen many scenarios like this. Israel has tremendous expertise in this type of work, extracting people from buildings, etc. They send their teams all over the world. So building collapses, it's Shabbos. Now, obviously, you're allowed to dig it up. Even though it's Shabbat, you're allowed to do whatever you need to get people out of this building. So you uncover someone. They uncover someone, call over a doctor. Talmud says the doctor examines the guy. The doctor says he's alive, barely. He's not going to live more than a few hours. And he will be unconscious the entire time. So the rescuer says, well, am I allowed to continue the excavation? Because if I don't excavate, he'll die immediately. If I do continue the excavation, I'll extend his life a few hours and it will be unconscious. Meaning, during that time, he will not declare Shema Yisrael and declare his remorse for all his sins or anything, or forgive the other guy. No, nothing. He'll be unconscious. And it's only a few hours. He won't be able to, as you can't say, okay, I'll desecrate this Shabbat for him. This way he'll be able to keep other Shabbos. You can't say that because he's not. What's the law? The halacha is you're obligated to indeed excavate the rest of this person in order that he or she may live for a while longer. You've desecrated Shabbat. So that's interesting. We are transgressing Shabbat, we're not really saving a life. It's not like by excavating, he's now going to live beforehand he was going to die. By excavating, now he's going to live 6 hours. Beforehand, he would have lived a few minutes. So now giving him 6 hours of life, and that life is unconscious. So what we see from here is an amazing principle, as is expounded by Chafetz Chaim in his book Mishnah Brura, written early 20th century, one of the authoritative works on Jewish law, at least in the laws of Shabbat, etc. And he says what we see from here is that we consider that life to be of infinite value, even if it's a short term, even if it's unconscious. Now, you could ask yourself, what's the value, a quality of that life? The answer is we don't know, right? First of all, the soul is in this world, and the soul being in this world, there is some value to the soul being in this world. What can the soul possibly do? How can the soul be elevated when it's in an unconscious body? So Rav Eliezer Dessler, great Jewish philosopher from mid 20th century, he says the following. He says, your soul can be elevated as long as it's in this world, because once it's in this world, it can be the cause of many positive things. The person who's unconscious and the worker is now providing comfort to this person to try to alleviate pain, or maybe praying for that person, or maybe helping the family, or at least providing a proper burial, etc. Are these effects? These are effects in this world caused by that soul. So even if the person is not conscious, their soul is still being elevated because of the fact that it has vicariously caused other people to be doing good things. Does this make sense? In other words, so a person could, God forbid, be in a coma, but the fact is that other people are inspired by this person in the coma to pray, to take care of their family, to take care of this person, prevent bed sores, this, that, etc., etc. So those are all very worthwhile things. So again, I'm just giving these an example. Even if you could find a case where none of those things are happening, it still would be irrelevant. It would still be a case where life takes precedence. Now, again, with every principle, we always look at principles in pure, pristine situations, like the scientific method. You create a pure, pristine lab conditions, right? And then you do the experiment, and then you might change one variable, change another variable. So halacha works the same way. We look at things in pristine. So in the pristine, pure halachic Jewish legal concept, life is infinite. And even a short lifespan, however, there may be situations. What if we have a short lifespan versus a long lifespan? Let me give 2 examples of that. There was a small hospital in South Africa, and a Jewish doctor, this is many years ago, this is probably in the 70s, I think, maybe the 60s or the 70s. Religious Jew is a doctor in a small hospital somewhere in the countryside in South Africa. They have 1 bed in the ICU, 1 bed. Generally, the hospital's policy is that bed is reserved for car accident victims who have a high chance of recovery. A person who has got a fatal disease, a person who is got a deteriorating medical condition and needs the ICU, they usually won't admit such a person. They want to leave the bed open for someone who's got a high chance of survival, living a normal lifespan. Okay, so it's type of interesting. Now, that's their policy. Now, if perchance someone was put on in the ICU, someone who has got a low chance of recovery, very low chance of a long lifespan, they won't take that person off, because that would be tantamount to killing them. They won't, unplug them from the equipment, etc., into the intubation and so on and so forth. So this doctor in South Africa sent a question to Reb Moshe Feinstein, who is an American posek, one of probably the greatest halachic decider in the world in his time. He passed away actually on the eve of Purim. His funeral was on Purim. I was there. It was about 250,000 people in Jerusalem. That was in 1985, if I remember correctly, or 86. 86 maybe. So anyway, he was asked, Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked this question. The doctor said, can I work in this hospital? Is that policy correct? Is it not correct? What should I do? He asked two people. He asked Rabbi Moshe Feinstein in the United States. He also addressed the question to Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, who was a rabbi who, because of geography, became a leading expert in medical ethics. He lived near the old Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem, which used to be, a long time ago, in the 60s and 70s, from the 30s onwards until the 70s, 80s, it was near the Tachana Merkazit, old bus station. So he used to live near there, and he used to go, there's a shul in the hospital, he used to go there and study every day. And doctors would come in, and it's a religious hospital, so most of the doctors were religious Jews, and they'd see Rabbi Waldenberg, they'd ask him questions, and he'd research it, and he'd come up with an answer. And this happened on a regular basis every day. This happened for 20 years, right? So he eventually became one of the world's leading experts in Jewish medical ethics. He has 18 volumes on it. Anyway, he was asked a question as well. So type of interesting, both rabbis agreed that that he would be allowed to work in the hospital. Rav Eliezer Waldenberg maintained that the hospital's policy was indeed correct. In other words, if you've got scarce medical resources, the question is, we're not the person who's got a short lifespan, who we previously mentioned is certainly permitted, obligatory to save that person's life. He says, it's not like we're disregarding his life, but we're balancing it with scarce resources against the person who has a capability of living a normal lifespan. So if the person is a car accident victim, apparently the roads there were very dangerous, and there are a lot of car accident victims. So a car accident victim is very likely to recover if he's got the correct treatment, whereas the moribund patient who's got the fatal illness, etc., is not going to recover and not going to live a normal lifespan. So Rav Eliezer Waldenberg felt that it was correct for the hospital to take their scarce resources and direct it towards normal lifespan over the short lifespan. This makes sense. That's what Waldenberg felt. Rav Moshe Feinstein said no. He disagreed. He felt it should be a first come, first served basis. That you're not allowed to make such a decision, since a short lifespan we clearly see is valued by halacha. He says making such a decision is wrong. No one can make such a decision. So if you can't make such a decision, what do? He says, first come, first serve. So that would be one case. Another case where the short lifespan versus normal lifespan comes into place is experimental treatments. So let me tell you, there's a weird, what about extension of life for animals and pets? I'm talking about humans here. There's no obligation to extend an animal's life. There's a prohibition against causing pain to animals, and there's an obligation of the Torah to alleviate an animal's pain. But one is under no obligation to extend their life. If the animal, if the vet feels the animal will live. I just had a question about this recently. Someone's rabbit. So they said, is it permitted according to Jewish law? The vet said that the rabbit is going to die, going to be a lot of pain. To prevent it from this would cost thousands and thousands of dollars, and would be a lengthy process, which is uncertain. And so the family said, we allowed to kill? I said, yeah, you're allowed to kill the rabbit. Kill the wabbit. Anyway, so sorry, I didn't say that to them. They were pretty emotional about it. Okay. Okay. So I'll try to get to that question soon. So regarding experimental treatments, regarding a short lifespan, so there's a weird Mishnah. The Mishnah says, as I said, Mishnah was written 170, 200 CE in Israel. Now, at those times, pagans, idol worshippers, there were many idol worshippers who were doctors. There were not many, but there were doctors who were Ovdei Avodah Zarah, who were idol worshippers. Now, a doctor like that would be just as likely to kill you as save you. I don't know if you ever heard of the Thagi cult in India. Right? There used to be a cult in India known as the Thagis, who would worship the goddess of war by strangling random strangers. They had the ritual rope with a knot in the middle, because obviously if you're strangling someone, you want to have a knot in the middle to break whatever. I won't get into the details, but something they taught in ninjutsu anyway. So they used to kill people. The British put a stop to it by executing many of them, typical British style, but they did put a stop to it. And now, so either way, so these pagan doctors way back then, they could cure you, but if they were in the mood or if there was some special occasion, they may kill you, right? So the question was asked, can you go to a pagan doctor? So the Mishnah says this, listen carefully. Mishnah says, if the person's suffering from a disease, which if nothing happens, they will die within a year. If they're not helped, they'll die within a year. If they are cured, they will live a normal lifespan. So such a person could go to the pagan doctor. What's the logic? The logic is like this. Look, if he cures you, you'll live a normal lifespan. If you don't do anything, person will die within a year. Which means, and if this doctor is in a bad mood or whatever, he's got his gods, or the signs are aligned in heaven, he'll kill you. Okay, you've lost a short lifespan, but it's a short lifespan, which even if you didn't do anything, you'd anyway die within the year, right? So that means you're allowed to risk a short lifespan for a doubtful treatment that might either kill you or give you a full lifespan. Is it making sense here? It's type of like game, I think we call this game theory, right? So how is that Mishnah relevant to us? We don't have doctors like that, thank God. Well, Dr. Kevorkian, but usually not, right? Usually don't have doctors like that. So how is this relevant to us? Answer is experimental treatments. There are experimental treatments, and it may be there are some experimental treatments for certain cancers. I know someone who was offered experimental treatments by a university. He had some serious, he unfortunately died. Good friend of mine, this is a number of years ago, and he was offered experimental treatment by a university in St. Louis, University of, I forgot what it's called, something Washington, but it's in St. Louis. And they offered him an experimental treatment. And, they said, look, the experimental treatment may kill you. If we don't do anything, you have maximum of a year. If the treatment works, you might live a normal lifespan. So type of halacha would say that is permitted based on that Mishnah. Now, the question about, we don't suspect today that your average non-Jewish doctor is a pagan. That's not, no, definitely not. This is a reality that existed 2,000 years ago, which no longer, thank God, exists. Your average doctor today, Jewish, non-Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, Zoroastrian, etc., irrelevant, right? That's just not a reality today that we have to worry about. But the Mishnah translates into the reality regarding experimental treatments. So we see that although Jewish law considers a short lifespan infinite value, and hence we save the person under the building on Shabbos, even though he's going to live short time and unconscious, nevertheless, when it's balanced against the possibility of a complete normal lifespan, but a risky treatment, i.e. pagan doctor or experimental treatment, it is permitted to take that treatment. Does this make sense? Understood? Okay. So we're giving these principles, but I'm just showing you the principles are pristine, pure principles, but when they're applied in real life, there are variations. Another example of a important principle is in Jewish law is the idea that we do not save one life at the expense of another. Next heavy metal band. Yes, actually, that is a great name. Yeah, I should get a percentage if your band makes it. So anyway, there is this idea that you cannot sacrifice one life to save another. So, I'll give you an example. It used to be, and it still is to a certain, depending on the organ. If the person is, and this of course depends on definition of death questions, which are massive questions, both in Jewish law and in secular law, because definition of death is not a scientific issue, it's a legal issue. In other words, how does the law define what's happening or not happening in this person now? Right? There are a number of different death criteria in the world. There are the Harvard criteria, the brainstem lysis criteria. There's a whole bunch, right? So brain death, respiratory cessation of respiration, etc. Leaving that aside, so let's say someone is dying, and we want to get their organs. They've already, they've said, yeah, I want to donate my organs, whatever, and we want to get their organ to save someone. We want to get the organ from them before they have actually died, because now the organ is still being oxygenated. It's fresh. It's like, it'll work, right, as opposed to getting it from a cadaver where it's not right, not optimum. So, but on the other hand, taking out the organ is going to kill this person. Can't do it. You cannot do it. You can't kill one person to save another, right? There's one exception to that, though. There is a case where you can kill one. And the principle, by the way, is based on a Gemara also, in which a Persian, any Persians here, happy spring, what's it called? Nuzar or something like that. Yeah, whatever. Right. There's some Persian holiday. Nuzar. No one knows. Okay. All right. So anyway, this pagan Persian says to a Jew, listen, he says, kill that guy. Noruz, thank you, Noruz, Rabbi. Mavruk, Noruz, Mavruk. Yeah, okay. So he says, kill this guy or I'll kill you. Horrific situation, right? Which unfortunately has happened to Jews numerous times, right? Kill this guy or I'll kill you. So you're not allowed to kill the other guy. You have to allow yourself to be killed. I mean, obviously you can kill the person who says it to you because he's a direct threat. So that's called a rodaif, a pursuer. I'm allowed to take self-defense. I'm allowed to defend myself, right? Kill the other person, right? But I can't kill the innocent third party to save my life. Clear? Now, the only time I can kill someone, kill A to save B, is if A is trying to kill B. So classic case, A is running after B with a machete, and he's going, I'm going to kill you, etc. I've got my gun, right? So I shoot him. I can shoot A. That's totally not only permitted, but it's obligatory. Of course, if I could shoot him without killing him, I should do that. But it's extremely difficult to shoot someone. I mean, in the army, I was in the IDF. I have 3 sons who are in combat units in the IDF. The training is you shoot for the center of the body mass because that's the biggest target. And that's where it'll be most effective. Shooting at someone's legs who's running is just, unless you're a real expert shot, right? It's just no way, right? No way, all right? So basically, I'm allowed to shoot the guy to save the other guy. What about a pursuer who is an unconscious pursuer? That is to say, who is not intentionally pursuing the other person, but the situation is such they are threatening the other person. Classic example. And what's a classic example? The fetus whose birth will endanger the life of the mother. The fetus whose birth will endanger the life of the mother technically is considered a pursuer, a rodaif. The fetus is pursuing them. He's endangering the mother's life, but he's not your regular pursuer because obviously the fetus is not intentionally, so the fetus doesn't have intention. It's not like, I'm going to kill this or whatever. It's ridiculous, right? So, however, in as much as the fetus is not an independent life, but is dependent upon the mother's life, we always put the mother's life first. And Jewish law says to abort the fetus if that fetus is endangering the mother's life. Okay, clear? So we've got 2 categories of pursuer. A pursuer who's an intentional pursuer, the murderer, right? The maniac who's running around with a knife, etc. That him I can shoot, right? Neutralize, target, no problem. Mitzvah, great mitzvah, because he's an intentional pursuer. Okay. However, the fetus is an unintentional pursuer. The only reason I'm allowed to intervene in that case, obligated to intervene, is because the fetus, while it's considered to be a life, yes, but it's not quite an equal life to the mother. On the contrary, it's dependent upon the mother. So let me give you a fascinating case that is relevant to this, that occurred when the Surgeon General of the United States, his name was C. Everett Koop. Yes, mental health, it can also count if the mother is a suicide risk, severe depression, which is obviously a mental health risk, that also counts. It doesn't have to be only physical health. It could be mental health as well. That's considered to be life-threatening as well. Right? It's less common, but nevertheless, certainly something to be taken into consideration. Okay, certainly justified it. Yeah, the mother's life always takes precedence, etc. Okay, but here is the case. So the Surgeon General was the time, I forgot what year, it was in the 70s. There was a Jewish couple in Philadelphia, Orthodox Jews, and the mother gave birth to co-joined twins. And they shared a heart. There's only one heart. So this was a horrific situation. And the Surgeon General of the United States actually was the one performing the surgery. He was a religious Christian, and he consulted his church leaders as to whether such a thing, what he should do in that situation. The Jewish couple consulted Rav Moshe Feinstein, the person I mentioned before. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein, his son-in-law was Rav Moshe David Tendler, who just passed away 6 months ago. Rav Moshe David Tendler was head of the Einstein Medical School, a professor of biology, a rabbi of a synagogue in Monsey, a professor at Yeshiva University, and a teacher of Talmud at Yeshiva University. So he was reasonably well qualified to help with this. So Rav Moshe Feinstein had his son-in-law, he consulted with his son-in-law on this, and they discussed it at length. Rav Moshe Feinstein, I should point out, fasted and said psalms for an entire day to get to beg for help from God to make the right decision in this case. Such a heavy, he did not take any decision lightly. Many rabbis are like this. There's a Rav Herschel Schachter, who is the chief, he's the rabbi of the Orthodox Union, most world's largest hesher. So he teaches at Yeshiva University. I occasionally ask him questions whenever I have serious, really serious questions above my pay grade, which is most of them. So when I ask him questions, he sometimes cries when I ask him the question. If it's a case of someone suffering emotionally or whatever, he'll cry, and then he composes himself, then he answers my question. It's like very disconcerting, but he's very sensitive to people suffering. So Rav Moshe Feinstein consulted with his son-in-law, Rav Moshe David Tendler, and the issue was this. You see, neither of them, the opinion of the medical establishment was that they cannot both live. The heart is not strong enough to sustain both of them. There's no way. Can't sustain both of them. So one of them, however, they believed they could save one if they killed the other one. So they could save one of the co-joined twins, and if they could, cut the other one off, surgically remove the other one, who would die now without the heart. So you can imagine, we can't imagine, but just a horrific type of decision to make. So Rav Moshe Feinstein's conclusion was the following. He said, one of them is a pursuer of the other one. In other words, one of them is threatening, they're both threatening each other's life. That's clear, not deliberately, but they are in reality threatening each other's life. He says, how do we decide to intervene? Can we intervene? He said, well, is there some way to evaluate if one of them is threatening the other life or not? So Rav Moshe Feinstein felt that the one who the heart was circulating most blood to was compared, the other one really was threatening. In other words, the one if we could somehow determine, which they were able to do, to determine that the heart was doing most of the circulation of the heart was going to twin A, that means twin B is really a parasite. I mean, I hate to use the term, but a parasitical appendage who is threatening the life of twin A. And hence, as a rodef, as a pursuer, we will be allowed to intervene, which is what they did. Unfortunately, both of them died. So it ended up tragically. But that was the decision Moshe Feinstein made based on that situation, which was a quite tragic. But again, an example of the application of the Jewish law of rodef, the pursuer, in this case, an unintentional pursuer. But you see also, similar to the fetus, we could say that that fetus B was also not as much of a life as fetus A. Why? Because fetus A was the one who theoretically could live independently with this heart, whereas fetus B would not be able to because it was not circulating to that. So in that sense, you might compare fetus B to the fetus and A to the mother, right? In other words, both lives, yes, but unfortunately we have to sometimes evaluate that one life is indeed worth less, as we say in that particular case. How much time do we have, Rabbi Lewis?
A few minutes, just a couple of minutes.
Let me give you one more aspect of Jewish law. Jewish law says that this is derived from the Torah, as opposed to, let's say, Scientology or even in Catholicism, to a lesser degree than Scientology. But in certain religions, human intervention is considered to be like not ideal. You know what I mean? God has smitten who you to heal, etc., etc. Jewish law rejects that outright, and Jewish law maintains that it's obligatory. God gave us brains, and we should use our brains to intervene. Right? Medicine is a positive thing. Look at if you can name any of the greatest rabbis throughout our history, guaranteed some of them will be doctors. Maimonides, Nachmanides, Yehuda Halevi, Ibn Ezra. That's right. Those are some of the greatest. I just named like 4 of the greatest rabbis ever lived, and they were all doctors. Right. So we believe we believe that medical intervention is an obligation. Maimonides, when he came to Cairo, established the first public hospital there and ran it. Not only that, but he also instituted regimes to clean up the streets and create more hygiene, which he felt was carrying diseases, the dirt, etc. He saved people's lives. Unbelievable, right? So way ahead of his time in many areas. But so is it considered to be, so medical intervention is there to alleviate pain and to cure diseases. So what does Judaism say about, let's say, body modification, cosmetic surgery? Okay, let's say a person says, "I would like dimples," all right, or "I would like I would like a more Jewish-looking nose," or something like that, whatever, right? So a person may want it, right? Is that permitted? So type of interesting. Again, Rav Moshe Feinstein maintains if the person's appearance is causing them severe problems in their social interaction, he says, why is that less suffering than physical pain? He says social interaction or lack of is as much suffering, if not more, than physical pain. He says, so if you can cure this person's social problem with an operation, which is not clear, but let's say theoretically you can, he says it would certainly be permitted. We have precedents for that in the Talmud, or in Tosfos, actually, 12th century France. But so it's interesting that his view regarding cosmetic surgery was that it's actually okay. Genetic modification, right? Certainly okay. Many didn't exist at the time. Rav Moshe Feinstein passed away in 1986. I don't think they had that type of stuff. But yeah, certain genetic modifications certainly okay to cure diseases. Or for example, it's used in Israel today is they can actually test multiple fertilized eggs, and they can tell which ones will have diseases, and then they can decide, let's say a woman who has fertility issues and they take fertility drugs and there's multiple eggs, so they can actually do some genetic testing on the eggs and just eliminate the ones which will likely be born with a problem or a disease, etc. So that would be permitted, and if we could genetically eliminate diseases by genetic modification, that would certainly be okay. I don't see any problem with that. Halakhically speaking, Christians might object to it. Why? Because Christianity is an idea that a human shouldn't play God. In Jewish tradition, we say that's actually why we're here. We're here on this earth to be godlike. Right? Humans are meant to be like God. We're meant to be, right, in every possible way. We're meant to be godlike, exercising free will, independence, etc., endowed with intelligence and moral ability, and so on and so forth. It is actually the job of the human being to actually intervene in this world. Gender affirming surgeons, that would be much more problematic. You call it gender affirming. I think we would call it. Okay, that's already a statement. What you call it, but Jewish law has mutilation of the reproductive organs is prohibited unless it's to save someone's life or cure a terrible disease, etc. So that would be quite problematic. That's not just cosmetic. Right? That's much more than cosmetic, and hence would be quite problematic. Not to say that the person may be going through terrible psychological and emotional problems, but whether or not the cure of those is surgery, that's already questionable and very complicated, and actually, thank God, run out of time. Because that would be it's another hour just on that subject. But I hopefully we covered quite a few of the areas in Jewish medical ethics, some of the principles we use and how we apply them, and gave you a little bit of an intro. As Hillel said, the rest is commentary. Go and learn. And is there one more question? I didn't see it. Genetic modification. Yeah, I answered that. Yeah, another one. I think I answered that. Yeah. Potentially harmful disease. Yeah, certainly to remove potentially harmful or disease-prone genes like BCR, etc. Certainly okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you for coming, everyone. God willing, we shouldn't have any of these questions come up. But if they do, there are people who handle these on a regular basis. And okay. All right.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Becher.
Pleasure.
So we're going to be opening up the breakout rooms. But of course, if anyone has a question they would like to email Rabbi Becher, I will. If Rabbi Becher, if you could just briefly post your email address on the chat, and after we copy that down, I will open the breakout rooms for about 15 minutes, and then we will reconvene for our questions and our wonderful books giveaway, which, by the way, if you do win your book, you could request Rabbi Becher's book, Gateways to Judaism.
Gateway to Judaism.
Very fine book. Highly recommended. Okay,
very deep. You need to buy 2 copies. Read it twice. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yes. Okay, here we go.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. All right. What happens in the breakout room stays in the breakout room.
Yeah, you know it. You know it, Mati.
Okay.